and I'd like to say welcome to everybody. So, in the news recently, there has been, we also have the death of Terry Wogan now, but recently we had the death of David Bowie and Alan Rickman. And I know that there were other people that have passed away as well, but those are the two that I'm the most familiar with. And I was inspired to write a blog because there were a lot of posts and a lot and also adverts actually, but a lot of comments about cancer and a lot of these aggressive comments towards cancer, and they're still coming from some very famous people at the moment, and people are posting a lot about um, you know stuff you cancer, much stronger language than that, and knowing what I know about how the body works and all the study that I've done, I felt it was time to start speaking up a bit more. So I haven't been speaking up as much as I have wanted to, and I've decided that it's time to do that. So I did a post saying that David Bowie and Alan Rickman were not victims of cancer. So I want to explain why I believe that, and I want to explain what I think is going on. But what I do want to also sort of pre-frame with is to explain that I'm not suggesting that the illnesses and the disease that people who have cancer have to endure and the experience that they're having. Now, I'm fully aware that it is an unpleasant experience, very scary for a number of reasons, and we might talk a little bit about that later. So I'm certainly not suggesting that there are not, serious and quite frightening things going on for people. But I want to start to try to empower people to understand what they can begin to do for themselves more, how they can begin to impact their health more, if they were perhaps to look at things in a different way. So that's the purpose of this webinar. It is not to suggest that people should stop going to the doctors, stop working with their primary health caregivers, and it is certainly not a suggestion that people should stop treatment that they are taking. It is an attempt to put things into perspective so that people can make the most out of every opportunity to support their body in the return to health. And I want to make that very clear that in offering this new concept and the concept of a root cause, it isn't to suggest that certain treatments and certain types of health are appropriate or inappropriate. I do have feelings about that, and I know some of you who are joining me may have strong feelings about certain treatments. It's true that we need to be realistic about what some treatments can do to our cellular structures and our cellular body. So obviously chemotherapy is known to cause damage to healthy cells too. But the point is that we want to put that in perspective. We don't want to be taking away something from somebody that it is potentially helping them, and even if it's just because they believe it is. The power of belief and the power of placebo, if I believe something is good for me, then it has a chance of being good for me. So we will talk about how we can support the body in different ways, but it is not to suggest that taking away something that may be helping somebody is a good idea. It is about an overview and perspective. It is about gaining an awareness of the form and function of the body and looking at the impact that different things have on the body and how we can assist it through a process with more knowledge, awareness, and understanding, and as the technique suggests, conscious health practice. So I have chosen to focus particularly on the root cause analysis because that's what I said I was going to do. That was the crux of the blog. And it is why you're joining me. But obviously, I want to put it in perspective with everything else. So, first of all, I just want to begin by explaining what is conscious health practice. So with all the work I've done and all the study and the experience I have with training practitioners and working with clients, I have really developed quite a clear understanding and framework to work with. And really, the principle of what I have put together is that we can have a conscious awareness of the body's intelligent response to stress and our ability to influence and self regulate our physical, mental, and emotional health and well being. And as I say in something else I've written, that health is not something that just happens to you, you have an active part in it, whether you're conscious of that active part or not. And the idea really is to develop a conscious awareness of your part in that. So there are lots of ways of working with people, and I'm very fortunate to be trained in lots of different techniques, and I'm very grateful for having the ability and the time and the amazing people I've worked with to be able to put these techniques together. But what I feel I'm doing with conscious health practice is I'm looking and honoring where people are in their journey. I'm helping people to develop a perspective about where they are and why they might be in that situation at the moment. So really what we're aiming to do is to sort of do a bit of a health audit and say, okay, well, where am I? Let's stop kidding ourselves, or let's stop trying to be somewhere without really understanding how I'm going to get there, and let's just do an audit and honor where I am and really appreciate what our amazing survival intelligence is and what our body and mind is doing, and of course what that feedback mechanism is that we have called emotions, and how we can use this awareness to develop healthy practice. And in doing that, I think we take people from being a victim into being curious about what's going on. And really, that was what I said in the blog that I wrote. What if, rather than being victims, people that are suffering with cancer can become curious about why their body may be going through a process? What is causing it to get stuck in that process? Therefore, what could we do in order to support it through this process and back to health? Okay. So I want the information and the tools and the skills to be practical and accessible. I think if we're to make it a daily practice and go from kind of dealing in a knee-jerk reaction to situations to actually creating preventative, becoming healthy and stopping even getting to the point where we have to suddenly panic about diagnosis, and we're using this preventative health, then that's really where we start to take full ownership and create the life and the health that we want. So I want to put people in an empowering position and make it safe for people to update their information, to update their processes, to be able to let go of things that are maybe keeping them in dis-ease and ill health, and make it something that is a sustainable way of life. Okay, so that's really what the process that I'm developing does, is it puts all this stuff together to empower people to have more impact. So this is the basic overview of the 7 steps to conscious health practice, and it really is this simplicity of, somebody said to me, well, what is it you actually do? If you're going to put this out there, you've got to be really clear. And I realized it was about helping people know where they are in the situation. It's knowing how you got there, knowing what's going on, knowing what that actually means, knowing what to do about it, and not just what to do, but then how to do that, and then knowing how to sustain it and for it to become an enjoyable, healthy way of life. And so the ownership and the perceptions, the triggers and switches in the interpretation of those messages, managing them and understanding how to go about repairing and releasing and updating, and then mastering that in your own body. You'll notice those letters make the word optimum. So we're looking for optimum health. So on the 4-day workshop, the 4 days breaks down very nicely into these steps. What we're going to do today is quite simply begin with step 2. But what I've done is that I've moved some slides around and I've left some slides in that will just outline the other main steps. And the 7 main steps kind of break down into these 4 days. And so I'll go over the 6 key elements and the dynamic health plan towards the end of the webinar, just so that you have more of an overview. But what we're going to focus on today is the conscious root cause analysis of the liver in particular. And of course, this is possible with every tissue in the body, because every tissue in the body has a specific function and purpose. And I am also going to talk you through heart-focused healing to remind you of the process if you've experienced it already, or to introduce you to it if you haven't, and also just to maybe introduce to you how we may be able to use the technique through various different tissues or brain layers or specific organs. So we can actually, what I'm aiming to do is to do a series of either meditative processes or webinars or videos that will take you through a full health check. So as we go through to the conscious root cause analysis, you'll see the structure of how the body is organized. And it's my aim to provide you with support for each of these tissue types, each of these organs, and obviously each of these contexts and sort of traumatic scenarios that you can use to begin to help your body to heal, but also have as a rolling program of maintaining health and well-being. So I really have this idea that if we can maintain our health and look after our body and have a better relationship at listening to and understanding it, then we will prevent the frightening and very dramatic changes that can go on when the body is triggered into responses, because we will actually already know what's going on. So I'll come back and give you those overviews on the other sections later. So what I want to do is I want to take a step back and look at if we're going to examine a root cause analysis, we need to have an idea of what is our perspective when we begin to look at that. What is it we're really looking at? So I just want to outline to you the way in which the root cause analysis, where it kind of comes from, where the root cause analysis starts from. And there are some very simple, it's a very simple belief structure or perception that the body is not making a mistake. It's actually doing something very specific. Now, what's interesting is, in order to be able to examine what the body is doing specifically, we do need people to understand what's actually kind of going on a cellular level. But at the moment, the medical model, although the medical model studies what is happening on a cellular level, so this cell does that and that and that and that causes this and that causes that. If you go back to the beginning and we say, well, why is this cell doing that, then that, then that, the medical model doesn't really know why. And usually it will say in the medical documentation and all the books, cause of disease unknown. And even if we do see somewhere where it suggests what the cause is, what you'll find, that cause is actually only describing, well, this cell does that, so this tissue increases here, or this tissue decreases here, or this does that. It doesn't actually still say, but why does it? Why is that actually happening? So I'm going to introduce to you the very, very initial structure of the framework by which we are able to begin to make sense of what the body's doing. Some of you may have done an introduction with me. Some of you may have seen some other blogs or posts that I've made. I will be making a very, very basic introduction to each of these steps and each of these brain layers. I'll explain what that means in a short while, and the tissues, in order to introduce this more clearly and in a more broken down way. I'm going to explain it in the context of looking at the liver today. So if you have any questions, please ask me, but it is very possible that it will make more sense to you if you were to follow the basic kind of primary introduction that I'm going to do. Okay. So what we have at the moment is science at the moment studies the pathology of disease. Okay, we have pathologists, and the pathogenesis or pathogenesis is the study of the development of disease, specifically the disease process. So what is the nature or pattern or development of disease? Now, some time ago, a guy called Aaron Antonovsky, who wrote the book Health, Stress and Coping, he was a social doctor, I think. He began to use the word salutogenesis, or salutogenesis. And this is really the word we now associate or use to explain the study of the factors that support health and well-being. So he began to change the focus of examining health, rather than looking at disease, but looking at what makes us healthy. Okay. Now, what I hope you'll notice as we go forward is that both of these are very important to understand, but really our focus on what is healthy, what causes health, or what prevents health, is a different way of keeping my focus than looking at the study and development of disease. But in actual fact, in order to do a root cause analysis without us knowing what is going on in the disease, i.e. the pathology, it's very difficult to know what tissue is involved and what its state is. In order to be able to make a root cause analysis connection, we need to know the state of the tissue and what it's actually doing. And that'll become apparent in a short while why that's very, very important. So we're very grateful to the study of disease, but unfortunately what has happened, because we have put all of our attention and focus into the study of disease, is that it has meant that we have looked at developing techniques, so allopathic techniques, that seek to adjust the outcome, okay, the symptom. And allopathic medicine is the system of medicine that really looks at combating disease by actually trying to affect the outcome. Now, there is a whole host of reasons why this is not sustainable, can create further complications, because it doesn't take into consideration the way the body works as a whole. And there's a whole host of reasons why medicine went this way. I won't go into that in this recording. Maybe I'll make a separate recording about that. But we are really left with, at the moment, we are kind of riding a wave of a lot of change, and we are seeing the growth of complementary and alternative medicines. But I just wanted to help you to sort of put in perspective what we're about to look at, in that the homeopathic approach is about reaching homeostasis. It's working with the body, okay? And it's looking at how the body might heal itself. What can we do to help the body to heal itself, okay? Now, what I would like us to do, instead of making judgment on the medical model, on big pharma, and I have those, I have certain perceptions myself. What I want us to do is to just look at the current state. Let's just take an assessment of where we are, and let's just say that maybe for some people, we do need some drugs, because we are in a situation where certain people are suffering with certain symptoms, and maybe it's they don't have enough time, or maybe it's not they don't have the right situation to manage things in another way. So again, I just want to reiterate that we're not going to take away the way that people are handling things at the moment. What we want to do is empower people to see, well, if I take these drugs, what is it doing to my system, and how is it affecting my symptoms, and what is that doing to the rest of my system? And maybe while at the same time we can say, well, what else can I do? And how else can I look at my situation that will empower me to make other changes? And I'll talk later about threshold factors. How can I create a better environment for my health? So we want to work integratively, okay? And you may have heard the expression about integrative medicine. And really the idea is that we look at everything that is available to help somebody, and look at the impact that that might have on their health as a whole, on their symptoms and how best to help people manage their symptoms, and at the same time, what else can be done to create more strength, more health, alleviate symptoms, perhaps without causing impact or a negative impact on the body or on the threshold. So, so we're going to look at how we might work with an integrative approach in putting together all of the things available to somebody for them to be empowered. Okay, so about empowering somebody with a new perspective. Okay, so as I say, if you've got any questions, do feel free to ask. I don't have any at the moment, which is good. I've tried to leave enough time, if I digress slightly, that we still have time to get through the slides. So, so that's what we're looking at. Okay. So the principle of conscious root cause analysis, and obviously, just to make it clear, I've studied German New Medicine and I have studied meta medicine. I believe some of the other studies that I've done with some of the specialists in trauma and in energy therapies and techniques gives me a slightly different perspective to both of these institutes alone. And that is why I have chosen to put this together in my own way and approach it in my own way, with my own kind of ethics and my own technique. And that is why I talk about conscious root cause analysis, but I don't use the expression meta or meta medicine or German New Medicine. But I do want to kind of honor where I've studied and where I've learned a lot of what I've learned, and the people that I've trained with. And obviously, people in both of these other areas doing amazing work. And my aim is to put this out into the world in a way that I feel makes it accessible. And the best way for me to do that is explain it in my way. Okay. So if we were to look at our bodies being born on this planet as a mammal, as an animal, we are born for survival. And our bodies and minds adapt instinctively to give us the best possible chance of survival. That is what we do. We do that without the conscious awareness of it. We are born to do that. We are inherently able to adapt, adjust, and survive. Okay? So it therefore stands to reason that if we were to know what the body is actually doing, because it has that capacity to adapt on a cellular level for my survival, if we can understand what it's doing, then we can kind of work backwards, if you like, and look at what is causing that change to happen. If we can understand what is causing that change to happen, we can influence and support the process to return to health. Okay, we can understand how the body is changing and therefore what needs to happen in order to allow it to go back to equilibrium. Okay, and it is my belief and my understanding from all that I've learned that it is not the process that causes disease. This is a natural process of adaptation and then reaching homeostasis and equilibrium again and coming back into balance. And then, we are constantly, I don't know however many billion, I've heard it, so many different numbers now, something like 60 billion cells. We we are constantly changing and adapting as my breathing changes, as my thoughts change, as I go up the stairs or down the stairs. My body is constantly increasing function, decreasing function, increasing in the operation in one area and decreasing, down regulating in another. I'm doing that all the time. It's a natural, normal process, and it's through these processes being used and being put under demand that my body learns how to increase its capacity to manage those demands. So our growth comes through these processes, and it builds strength and wisdom, and we build our resilience through these processes. Okay, you may or may not know the story of the butterfly coming free from the chrysalis, and the butterfly has to struggle for its life to get free from the chrysalis. Without that struggle, its wings wouldn't be engorged, and it wouldn't increase its capacity to form its wings and to take shape, and it would die. It is the struggle that actually gives it the strength to be able to fly. Okay, so it's going to fly because it had that struggle. We're born to do the same thing. We are born to go through a struggle and out the other side and become stronger. Okay, so I'm going to break the explanation down into the basic principles. Okay, and although I initially sort of learnt about these two phases from German New Medicine, and Dr. Harmer sort of talked about his discovery of this, it is by no means his discovery alone, and it is commonly recognized in many different areas and in medical practice that we do have a demand phase and a recuperation phase. And in fact, Bruce Lipton also, coming at it from a slightly different angle, but he also explains, as he's proven on a cellular level, that we cannot be in a state of fight or flight, or state of stress, of survival, and a state of recuperation and repair at the same time. If we are in a state of stress or in a state of demand on the system or on particular organs, then it is increasing its function. We are in phase one, and it isn't until that demand, the need for that demand has passed, that we can enter into the recuperation phase, where the body comes back into homeostasis. And you can imagine it like the swinging of a pendulum. If I swing up one side, however high I swing that side, I do need to swing back the other way in order to repair. Now, there are different schools of thought on this. I'm trying to keep it simple just for this presentation, but for a whole host of reasons, we can affect the swing of that pendulum in the other direction with various by managing various factors, by working energetically, by looking at our diet, and many other things. So we'll talk about threshold factors a little bit later. But the general principle is that if I have an increase or a decrease of tissue in my demand phase, where my function needs to be increased in a particular organ, then in the second phase, when the danger or the need for that demand has passed, then the body needs to either increase that tissue again, build it back up, or take it away if I no longer need it. Okay, and remembering the body that is doing that all the time. Okay, so this is the simplicity of the two phases. Now, those of you familiar with this model will notice that in my model, this is the updated version, there is at point 2 here, there is a point going downwards. And I've added this, and I have run this by Dr. Anton Bader from Meta Medicine, and Rob van Overbruggen, my master trainer, and a few other people. And they seem to agree with my differentiation between a freeze response and a trigger. It's my understanding from everything that I've studied and looking at Porges polyvagal theory and other specialists in the study of trauma, So Peter Levine and Dr. Robert Scare, that being triggered is slightly different to the original freeze response, where we have um, it's Dr. Robert Scare that calls them trauma capsules. Okay, we encapsulate information that is hardwired immediately into our subconscious for survival purposes. So we can hardwire information within the first 6 years of our life for survival purposes. We can hardwire information through repetitive practice, and this builds our neural pathways. And this is why we can change habits with enough practice and create new habits. How we can learn things like driving that then enter into our subconscious, where we don't have to think about certain steps anymore. And at the same time, we can hardwire information into our subconscious through a traumatic event, because it's a survival event and I must record that information. And whatever strategy I developed at that time becomes my initial go-to strategy for survival in the future. And that doesn't have to mean that the event happens again, but even the possibility of that event happening again could trigger my response. Okay, so the freeze encapsulates and embodies and embeds, if you like, the information. But in the future, a trigger could cause me to go into the demand phase. I don't need another freeze. Now, I can actually develop a freeze response as a strategy. That's a whole other thing and a whole other area I could talk about. But usually what happens is an animal will have a freeze response, and this is because it's the only option left. It cannot run or it cannot fight, so its next best option is to freeze. But when the freeze passes, usually it will then go into the first phase of these two phases. It will go into the demand phase, because it will then have to run away. As soon as the danger's passed, it will still run. Or having had a freeze, it will adopt one of the other two, the fight or flight responses, until it is absolutely sure that the danger has passed, and then it will go into rest and repair. So the freeze is a parasympathetic response, and I'll talk a bit about this later on when we talk about parts and Porges' theories. But basically, the dip in my autonomic nervous system, the slowing down of my heart and my breathing, is to feign death until the danger passes. There are other areas. There's fool around and fainting and all that sort of thing, but predominantly there are the three main: fight, flight, and freeze. Okay, so so I basically pause, I stop, everything sort of slows down, shuts down, and as soon as the danger's passed, I then have to get away or respond or get to safety. So I can then kick myself into, or my body will then go into, an increase in heart rate, an increase in breathing, and a shift of the blood to my main muscles in order to act. Okay. So the point I want to make is that this is a normal process. And as well as this autonomic nervous system, this fight, flight, this, I keep saying it in a different way, but it's the flight, then fight, then freeze mechanism. This is a normal thing. And obviously we want to be able to do that. If a tiger comes in the room, I want to have this ability for survival. It would be madness to train that out of somebody, or to not have that as an animal survival mechanism. But of course, the problem is that once we've embodied that information, if we haven't gone through the natural process of releasing our freeze mechanism and returning ourselves back to equilibrium, and as in the animal world, we call it back to grazing. If we don't go back to grazing, we end up with this stuck response. Okay, and then we perceive the potential for this repeated event or even the same event because we're still stuck in the moment of that event. That moment is encapsulated. So because we don't release that initial trigger, that freeze, we are triggerable into the same processes that we were at the time of the event. Now, the step further, if you understand that mechanism, then most of the medical profession do talk about this mechanism, and there's a lot of study and a lot of talk about this. But part of that mechanism is the recruitment and the increased function of specific organs specific to the specific type of traumatic experience or event that is happening. So today we're going to specifically look at what causes a change in the liver. Okay, if we have this freeze event, what is it that is specific about that freeze event that not just affects that autonomic nervous system response, but that also affects it in specific organs? Okay, so I just wanted to add in, just at the last minute, I put my piece of graphics I did a while ago. I made a postcard, and it just helps to see the bunny go through these phases where at the beginning he's healthy, he's grazing because the bunny lives in the wild and he's able to come back to grazing when he has an event. And he has a shock. Maybe he sees the fox coming round the corner and he freezes. And when the danger passes, he may go into a panicked run and he may run away and run back to his warren and go back to his home into the safety of his underground burrow. And at that point, all of the demands on his system, the increased breathing, the increased function of his musculoskeletal system, his heart pumping, all of those things now need to go back to equilibrium, and he will go through a phase of the body readjusting. That's when he's going to feel not so good. Okay, that's when he's going to feel what we would call disease, uncomfortableness, and illness. I know my rabbit's got spots here. I don't necessarily get spots, but he does look pretty ill. So that was that's the idea of the picture. So he's going to be pretty poorly until he reaches equilibrium. And the only way he's going to come out of that process as a natural process is when he comes out of stress, he will shake off and release from his system the traumatic experience, and he will release from his body and his energy, and therefore also his psyche, because they're all interconnected, they're a continuum. He will release from his system that traumatic event, and then he will go about his life again. He will go, when he's gone through the symptoms and come out of the number 7 and number 8, back out the other side, he'll go back to being healthy, and he'll go back to being able to go outside and graze again. He will be able to respond next time to a danger, but he will not be spending all his time looking over his shoulder and panicking, and every noise he hears thinking that the fox or the wolf is coming to get him. And he won't be constantly afraid of the fox coming to get him because he's released that from his system. Okay, and this is the part of the process that we don't do. We've kind of unlearned it. It is a natural process that we can do, and a lot of the energy therapies that we work with do help us to do that. But what we do is we kind of accrue events. We sort of store them, and then they build within us, and it affects our threshold of health. It kind of affects the way in which we're then able to deal with even the slightest and smallest of things. So what we want to look at is the intelligence of the body structure and how the body intelligently knows how to adapt, not just in that autonomic response of increased heart rate and increased breathing, but also in specific organs that do specific jobs. Okay, and this again is a natural process that we do as animals. with no conscious awareness. And the aim of conscious health practice is to connect together this autonomic response, this non-conscious, deeply subconscious response, with our conscious awareness into what we call this, or what I'm calling this, super consciousness. And I recently heard Dr. Stephen Porges talking about the success of trauma therapies, and what he feels makes a successful trauma therapy is that which moves information between the explicit and implicit mind. And really what he's talking about, it is the subconscious and the conscious mind is the term that we use more often. And what I feel we are doing with the techniques that I use is we are creating a super conscious awareness of what is going on in our subconscious and being consciously mindful of those processes so that we can have more impact. So we're bridging our awareness and our conscious awareness with the intelligence of our subconscious and autonomic response. Okay. I've got no questions yet, so I'm assuming that you're all with me so far. If you've got anything arising, please feel free to ask. Okay, so we're going to move it. So I just want you to put sort of in the background there this concept of these two phases, that they're very natural, they're very normal, they're ebbing and flowing all the time within all of our organs and within the whole of our system, and we are in a constant state of flux. Okay, it's very normal, but that we accrue information that starts to cause us to be triggered in some of those responses that happen naturally, maybe when they don't need to happen. Okay, so that's what starts to happen. So now we're going to look at how our tissue structure and how our body is formed and how our brain works with our body, so that you can understand how we can use this system in order to examine what our tissues are doing, what our organs are actually doing. Okay, so it's not just a kind of a random thing, it's a very, very specific thing. So, and you'll see how each of these things comes together as we move forward. Okay, so you may have heard expressions about the survival brain or the reptilian brain, and there's a basic understanding that through our evolution over millions of years, we have become more developed and more complex. So we've gone from this kind of primordial soup and these single cellular beings, and then we've gone through various stages and phases of development, and through the reptilian phase and then into the mammalian phase, and we've developed as human beings, developing in our cerebral cortex more and more complex neurological structures and thinking capacity, and our ability to plan and understand the concepts of time, and that creativity is all kind of quite advanced later brain development. But a lot of our survival still remains the function of our earlier brain development. So the brain in this diagram, this is color coded, and I'll stick with that color coding through the explanation. It's also the same color coding as Rob van Overbruggen's amazing charts. So if you have those, or if you are interested in those, and you eventually get those, then you'll see that this is the same color coding. So here we can see the very basic breakdown of the brain. We've got the brainstem and the cerebellum, which we would consider, which is generally termed the old brain, the early brain, and then the later developed new brain. And the cerebrum there is it is all the cerebral cortex, but Dr. Harmer in German New Medicine separately defined a piece inside that as the cerebral medulla. Medulla quite simply means inside. that, okay, within something. So we have the medulla used within the name of a lot of other organs to talk about what's inside. And the reason that he separately defined the cerebral medulla was because it is the function, it is that part of the brain that directly associates and connects to the musculoskeletal system, amongst other things, the lymph system and some parts of other organs as well. But in general, and I'm going to try and keep this simple for this explanation, in general, if you were to take a CT scan and look in, and slice open somebody's brain at that level, there is a very, very clear pattern of the structure of the neurology of the brain that coincides with the order and structure of the musculoskeletal system and the lymphatic system. And the body is organized in such a way as to be controlled in relationship to these separate sections of the brain. Now, I'm going to take this one step further in a moment, but I'm just going to make sure we get this bit first. So as the brain developed and became more complex, what we find in the structure of the body is that the functions of specific organs coincide with the way in which the brain developed. And so our basic fundamental digestive and reproductive and our breathing and our control of water are all brainstem. They are the most fundamental to my survival as an animal. And then as we get more complex, right to the other extreme, the later developed part of the brain, so we're talking about the red part, the cerebral cortex and the prefrontal cortex, this is all the development of us as social animals. So what we find here is that this part of the brain is associated with tissues that respond to social and territorial aspects and my contact in that sort of context. So there is no mistake about the organized way in which the body has developed. And as I've become more complex, or as humans we've become more complex, the order and structure of the organs and tissues of the body have developed with that function. Okay, now how has it done that? It's the next part of the puzzle. So the study of the embryo and the way that tissue has developed is called ontogenesis or ontogenetic study. It is the study of how once the cell tissue starts to divide in the womb and in the embryo at a certain number of days, I think it's 23 days, I can't remember, to be honest. I can check that if anybody's really wants to know. But at a certain point in the cellular division, the development of the embryo begins to take a structure of a ring, and it begins to divide into different cell tissues. And imagine a worm that is, it's got its anus and its mouth together at that point. So it's just a ring, but it's like a worm, and it has a little digestive tract all the way down its middle, and it has a skin on the outside and then a tissue between the two. And that is how an embryo starts to form. And then at a certain point, the embryo breaks. So then the mouth and the anus of the embryo is sort of breaks apart, and that is then the basic form and structure of the embryo as it then begins to develop. Okay, and there are three fundamental types of tissue. So there is a basic stem cell tissue, but then it becomes one of three tissues, and that is the inner tissue, which you'll see in this picture is the brainstem, the yellow digestive tract there. There is a middle germ layer that also has a newer type of germ layer. So we've got there the old mesoderm and the new mesoderm. And then there is an outer germ layer. So the inner germ layer is what we call endoderm. Then we have this mesodermal, which is middle germ layer. And then we have the outer germ layer, which is the ectoderm, ecto being outer. Okay. Now, you'll notice that I brought this color coding forwards into this diagram. So what actually Dr. Harmer discovered, which I think is really the key to all of this, and this makes this all fall into place for me, is that he recognized the relationship or the correlation between the tissue type and its connection with the brain layer. So what he recognized was that the endoderm, all of the tissues in the body, all of the endodermal tissues in the body are connected to the brainstem. That's why the brainstem is colored yellow. So that is most of our digestive tract. That is the key tissues within our sexual organs. It is my lungs for my breath, because that's key to my survival. Okay. It is the part of the kidney that regulates my intake of water, because that is key to my survival. It is the most fundamental germ layer. Okay, and it is associated with and controlled by the oldest part of the brain. And the earlier of the middle germ layers, the middle mesoderm, is actually kind of overdetermined and controlled by the cerebellum. So the tissues of the body, the parts of organs that are made from that particular tissue, are associated with that part of the brain. They're controlled by and connected to that part of the brain. Remember, I was telling you that if we were to slice the cortex and see the pattern within the brain for the musculoskeletal system, we would see a very specific pattern. You actually do see like a little skeleton in the shape in the brain. The order is in the order that like a little skeleton almost lying in the brain. It's called a homunculus. So this has been mapped by neurologists and understood, in a whole area of science of its own. And what we also know is, corresponding with that, is that all of those tissues associated with that part of the brain are actually made from the new mesodermal tissue. They are made from that specific middle germ layer. Okay. And finally, we also know that the tissue of all of the parts of my body that actually make contact with the outside world, so my skin and actually my nervous system and the some of the tissues that kind of go into my orifices, let's say, are actually made of the ectodermal tissue, and they are associated with my contact. Now, what is very interesting is that it is possible through studying these correlations to see how they fit with our development. And the theme of our development fits with the way that the tissues respond. So let's just have a look at what I mean by that. So the brainstem is associated with the inner germ tissue, and it is to do with the digestion and survival of my species. So my sexual reproduction and my most basic fundamental processes of eating, breathing, and retaining water and reproducing. Okay, now that's pretty basic and pretty fundamental in my reptilian brain. But then as we evolved and we became slightly more complex and started to need to protect ourselves better, what we find is that the tissues associated with this further developed part of the brain include our actual dermis of the skin, the protective underlayer of our skin, includes the meninges layer, and includes all of the protective layers in the body like the pleura, the peritoneum, and the pericardium, and all those sort of sacs and parts of the body that protect my organs. And you'll see in that diagram there that this embryo has those highlighted. As we then became more mobile and developed more as mammals, we find that becoming more complex, the newer part of the brain is associated with movement and strength, and these tissues specifically correlate with that. And as I've mentioned, finally, the more advanced stage now that we're at as social beings and socially connected beings, and those parts, those tissues of our body are associated to that latter development of the brain. So there is a correlation between the way in which the brain has developed and evolved and the cellular structures of the body and how they kind of become, our function has become more complex, how they actually maintain their job within the cell structure that they operate, or the way that they operate, in this totality of this system. All of these tissues are doing their thing. All of these tissues are functioning in a very specific way, getting on with their job, but we are able to identify the theme of what that tissue might be doing. So when we look at a root cause, so the point is, why is this relevant? How does this actually help me? Yes, you could go and study ontogenesis, or you could study neurology, but what is the point of this, and how does this help me do a root cause analysis? Okay. So the point is that if I understand what is going on in the organ, what the tissue is doing, I can look at that in the context of its job, how it's responding, the theme of that event. What is that event related to? Is it related to social, territorial, and contact? Is it related to strength and movement? Is it related to protection and integrity? Or is it related to digestion and survival? I can actually correlate that tissue to the type of event that it must be responding to. Because if it's brainstem, it must be responding to that theme. If it's old mesodermal tissue and cerebellum, it must be responding to something of that theme. If it is a musculoskeletal issue, it must be responding to that theme of strength and movement. If it is a cortex issue, if it is ectodermal, outer skin, outer germ layer, then it must be to do with the theme of social, territorial, or contact. Okay, this gives me my first step in understanding. If we know the tissue, then we know the theme of the nature of the kind of conflict or the kind of event that has been triggering this tissue response. Okay, and I just want to clarify that when I talk about germ layer, what I mean is the germination, the original sort of seed of that cell, the original type of cell, not as in germs, that's a whole other thing. But germ layer refers to the original type of cell that it is derived from. And there are these three, with the mesodermal splitting into two. Okay. Now, there is another key fundamental part of this that helps us with our pointing the direction to the root cause. And you may notice that there is a piece written on this chart here about cell plus and cell minus. And what we can notice is that the early brain, the brainstem and the cerebellum, has a cell plus followed by a cell minus. Okay, it'll become clear when I talk about it in a moment. So the early brain increases in cell first, followed by decreases in cells. And this correlates to that two phases that we were just looking at a moment ago, the demand phase and the recuperation phase. So what we know is that the brain's tissues associated with the brainstem and tissues associated with the cerebellum increase in cells. They make more cells in stress when we are in demand and we are increasing function, followed by, when they go back to homeostasis, they decrease again to go back to normal, okay, in a normal natural process. Whereas what we notice from tissues associated with the more recent part of the brain and the newer brain, we notice that there is, for both the cortex and the medulla, we notice that there is a decrease in the demand phase, followed by an increase in the recuperation phase. Okay. You don't need to remember that, but you'll see why that's relevant in a moment. Okay, so all we've done is we've looked at the concept that the body is doing an intelligent process, and I'm sorry for those of you that I know there are some people on this webinar that have already studied this, so I know you know this. But we're looking at the intelligence of the body. We're looking at the natural intelligence of two phases, and we're looking at the natural development and order of the brain and its association with these specific cell structures that respond in a specific way. Okay. So now we're going to come on to examine the liver and the tissue that we are here to talk about. Okay, so then you'll see now why this is relevant and how this works. Okay. So the basic structure of the liver. Okay, and we're just going to look at the general function of the liver. Now, many of the organs in the body have actually more than one tissue involved. They have developed and become more complex and manage things, and actually they probably have multiple tissues, but there will be a predominant function to specific tissues. Now you'll see I've color coordinated this diagram as well, and the parenchyma, the main body, the meat of the liver, I have color coded yellow. So we know that this is made from the tissue that is associated with the brainstem. I've also highlighted the liver bile ducts, and they are red. So we know that these are associated with the cerebral cortex. Okay, now we know that from people studying all the different tissues and organs and actually documenting the different tissues of these particular organs. Okay, so what we want to look at is what happens to the liver when it is put under a demand, or more importantly, what must be happening in order to increase its need to respond and its function. Okay, so the liver predominantly, I've written here, it plays a central role in the metabolism of food. So basically, it is the part of our body that when we eat food, it takes the nutrients, it breaks down the food and takes the nutrients out of the food and metabolizes those nutrients. Okay. So, and we're just going to stick with the yellow part for now. Okay, that is the main part of the liver. I know it's the most simplistic view, but I want to just stick with that because else we could get more complicated. So the liver breaks down, it metabolizes and takes the nutrients out of the food that we eat. Okay. So let's have a look. I've put my little diagrams together. So if we were to take a slice through with a CT scan and take a picture through the brain, we would see that the part in the middle here is where we would see a slice in the brainstem if we took the CT scan picture at the right place, which is like that picture of the brain there above. It is like taking a slice sort of halfway down through that, and therefore you're seeing the top of that yellow part of the brain. And all through those little rings represent how the body correlates different bits within that to the organs. And Dr. Harmer has fully mapped all of that neurological structure to the organs of the body and to the type of conflict or the type of event that somebody must experience in order to trigger that particular organ and part of the body. So I've just put my embryo there to remind you that it's mostly the digestive system that we're dealing with. And I've also put here the reminder that this particular tissue increases its function and increases the number of cells when it is going into a higher demand, which don't forget is a normal process, and how it then goes back to equilibrium by decreasing and getting rid of those extra cells in the second phase. okay, with a view to going back into homeostasis, back into balance. So the endodermal tissue, this tissue, increases in the first phase, and the point is, the biological purpose is to increase the capacity to take more nutrients out of available food. That's what it's doing, then that is its increased function. So if the liver takes nutrients out of the food, and an extra demand must be to take more nutrients out of the food. Okay, it's kind of a logical assumption. So what we do is we look at why that might happen. Okay, so what experience or what traumatic experience would cause the liver to increase tissue in that first phase so that it can take more nutrients out of the food? Okay, what kind of event or perception or what kind of past experience must have happened in order to cause the body to respond in such a way? Okay, so based on a lot of research, and I do also know personally, I haven't worked with anybody with liver cancer myself, but I do have colleagues that have worked successfully with people with liver cancer. What is it that they must have experienced in order to create extra liver cells to take extra nutrients out of the food? Okay, so let's look at what might have happened. So we call this a starvation conflict, and I'm going to talk about the use of the word conflict a little bit later. But basically, in a natural setting, in a natural state, if I were to experience a period of time where I didn't, or I wasn't going to get any food, my body is intelligent enough to adapt, and it will work harder to take more nutrients out of the food that I have available to me. So basically, if I know I don't have any food coming, the food that I do eat gets more work, if you like. My body creates extra cells and it takes more nutrients out of the food that I do have. Now, depending on the severity of this survival issue, the body will try to do, it will do a stronger job if it is a bigger conflict, if it is a bigger issue. But it will also keep doing it if I think this is going to happen, or I keep thinking it's going to happen, or I have a fear of it going to happen. Because remember, the body just dutifully responds to a survival issue. It isn't the bit that is making, let's say, it's making the adaptation, but it isn't making the perception itself. It is relying on other information and being told what to adapt to by what I perceive to be dangerous or not dangerous. So if I have a fear that I don't know where the next meal is coming from, or I'm being starved of something, it has no choice but to respond. If I'm not handling something on an emotional or mental level, my body will start to adapt. Now, don't forget, this is a normal survival mechanism. It's supposed to do this. It's supposed to help me through a period of starvation. Okay? It's a natural process, but it isn't supposed to keep running, and it certainly isn't supposed to keep running under demand, or to go, to have a very high increase of cell tissue. This is something that happens when we get stuck in a process. We get stuck in the disease process. So getting stuck is a result of either a real ongoing threat to not having any food or not having something I need, okay, or a perception that I may have this. So I'm just going to talk about a few examples. There is an example in the biogenealogy source book, and they use a lot of client case studies about a child, I don't know the pages now, a child hearing his parents talking about, it says a food store was in bankruptcy, and a mother rather flippantly said, we're all going to die of hunger. But the daughter believed her and developed liver cancer. Okay, so I know that somebody, a colleague, worked with somebody was whose daughter was triggered by hearing a similar thing, and it can be quite literally that I don't know how I'm going to feed. I don't know where the next meal is coming from. I don't know how I'm going to feed myself or my family. And of course, if you think about in modern day, we could be talking about losing one's job and losing one's income, because how can you feed yourself if you don't have an income? So things like redundancy, things like losing your job, things like falling on hard times, it can trigger a response in the liver to begin to increase cell tissue to try to take more nutrients out of food. Okay, so it can also be more metaphoric in that there is something really important lacking in my life. It can be, a lack of money, a lack of um, a holiday, or a lack of something that I really need for my survival. It has to be something that I really feel fundamentally, I really need this and I have a lack of it. So it's to do with the fact that I don't have enough of something, or I'm not going to be able to get something, but it's usually, but its original function, if you like, is around food and around sustenance. Now, if you think about sustenance, information can be sustenance, love can be sustenance. So if I'm not getting enough of something that I need for my survival, then, and I feel starved of it, starved of love, starved of affection, or I could just starve, then this can cause this program to run. And of course, in this webinar, we don't have time to go too much into belief structures and perceptions. But if we know that in the first 6 years of our life, we have formed our general perceptions and our general ways of seeing the world and seeing what is safe and what is dangerous, then depending on what we learned about these sorts of things in that first part of our life, this can affect the way in which we may or may not be triggered later in life. So I did think about looking at the background of David Bowie and looking at his upbringing and looking at his background. But I'm afraid all I would be doing, for obvious reasons, is just merely speculating. And I try not to do that. I try not to do that, even if I know somebody has a specific illness. I sort of ethically try not to speculate on what may have happened to that person, because we can never know. But if we were working with somebody who had a particular increase in this cell tissue, in this part of this organ, then I would be talking to them about what they feel starved of, what their perceptions around food and starving is, and going right back to their early perceptions of along these lines. Okay, and we would be looking at how the body is being triggered by and being held within these two phases. And in particular, of course, because cancer is an increase of tissue, how in particular we would be increasing in the tissue in this first part of this process. Because if somebody is continuing to increase cells, increase cells, increase cells, or is increasing cells at a very dramatic rate, then we can be sure that there is something very prominent running, or very imminent, or very strong issue running for an individual on one of these themes or in this theme. Okay, so if you've got any questions, or I'm going too fast or too slow, please let me know. Also, if anybody who's already studied in this wants to comment, please feel free to comment. If you think I'm missing anything out or not explaining something and you feel you'd like to contribute, then please feel free to do so. I haven't looked to see if anyone's got their hands up. Anna, you've got your hand up. I don't know if it's just from waving to me before, or you have a question. Also, I know it's Pia or Pyro, I don't want to say it wrong. Oh, if you just put your hand down, mind, that's okay. So if you've got a question, just send it to me in the box, and if I don't answer it and you need me to unmic you, I've not actually done that before in a webinar, but I can unmute you, and you can speak, assuming you have the right technology your end, of course, which is always the fear. So so please feel free to comment. Okay, nothing's coming through. So we're going to look at how we deal with this later. We're purely in the analysis phase at the moment. We're purely in how do we find our direction? Okay. Now, with this information, there are a couple of things that we could do. We could go off half-cocked and start telling somebody that they've got a starvation issue or they're starved of something. That isn't how we elicit information in this process. We have this structure in our armory, if you like, in our minds, and we just talk to somebody about what's going on in their life and sort of ask questions around this area and see how somebody responds. This is very powerful and loaded information, and if we go plowing in, and trust me, I've done it both ways, so I'm speaking from experience. If we go in talking slightly heavy-handedly about this subject with somebody in this with these symptoms, then you have to remember that you're going straight to the core of somebody's issues that they haven't been able to deal with, because otherwise their body wouldn't be responding. If they had a way to manage this emotionally, if they had a way to understand this differently, or a way to see this, their situation or the traumatic experience, the thing that happened to them that planted this seed of fear within them, then their body wouldn't have to be responding. Now, in the original teaching of these diagnostic tools, it is taught that a program like this runs from an initial trauma. I don't agree with that. I do agree that when we learn information in the first 6 years, we are hardwiring that information. And in fact, a trigger into this response could be a combination of hardwired information and my beliefs about starving and not making enough money and not having enough money to eat, and a fear about not being able to eat. But usually there is an event that begins this process where there is no strategy to deal with it. There is no other way for me to fix this. I have no no response. I can't deal with it any other way, and this then begins the program. From then on, it can be a combination of feeling that isolation and feeling that freeze response, but it can also be a combination of constantly being reminded and being triggered into that kind of red area, that section of plus cells, increase of cells. Okay. Now, we don't have time in this this webinar, and it is a whole other area that I will discuss separately. But somebody that has had this triggered, this process triggered, and has gone into an increase of cells in their liver and resolves their issue such that they no longer need to be in this demand phase with an increase of tissue and an increased capacity to take nutrients out of food, then they resolve the issue, they go into the second phase where those tissues are no longer required. So what happens is those tissue now have to be removed, have to be taken away. It is at this point that we get what is considered to be an infection, because this is where we engage with bacteria, mycobacteria, funguses, viruses, and microbes in order to either help build up tissue or help eat it, take it away. Okay, so if somebody is suffering with tuberculosis, getting night sweats, okay, then it is possible that they've been on a low level been running this program because now the tissue is being taken away. Okay, there are other tissues that are used taken away by tuberculosis, but this tissue in particular engages with TB to be taken away. Now, I just want to plant that little seed with you there. If you've got any questions on that, or if you want to know more, then that is a separate webinar. Okay. So what we're looking at really is something that triggers somebody to stay stuck in this first phase, this demand phase. Either a very, very strong increase, an acute increase, a very strong or imminent or particularly stressful, particularly dire threat to survival on this theme, or over a prolonged period of time, a constant retrigger, because that red section there can be kind of long and thin, it can be short and very, very tall, it can be any kind of different shape and size, and the body will be responding at that point. Okay, so the kind of takeaway from this tissue is that it is in the first phase, the stress, that somebody is developing the cancer. Therefore, if we can help to resolve the issue, we can help to develop the strategies by which the person has to deal with this triggering issue. If we can help the person to release the past trauma, if we can help the person to develop new ways in which they can support the body through these phases, create other or look after other parts of other ways in which the body can grow strong while they manage and deal with this particular issue, then we're looking at all of these things. We're looking at all of the ways in which we can help somebody kind of exit this program. How do we take them from the red phase into the blue? How do we get them from phase 1 into phase 2? And just as importantly, how do we help them to come out the other side and go back to equilibrium? Now, remember I said that we do not want to make any negative statements about medicines and about medical treatment, about drugs and that sort of thing. We want to empower somebody to be able to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and what's happening. This is a really good place to explain this, because if somebody develops tuberculosis, okay, that TB could be life-threatening if it is the opposite swing of the pendulum to the amount of stress that organ and that person has been under. So what I mean by that is, if the stress phase was very, very chronic and long-term, or very, very acute, or acute and chronic, then the amount of tissue to be taken away, the amount of repair to be undergone, and the amount of balance to be reestablished in itself could be life-threatening. Okay, so it would be wrong, wouldn't it, to suggest that we shouldn't help somebody manage the infection, the amount of tuberculosis in their system, whilst we help them through that process by looking at the root cause and the thing that originally caused this event, to ensure that this didn't happen again. It's not our place to say someone should or should not have treatment. It's our place to help them understand what is happening when that happens. The thing to bear in mind is, if I affect the work of the bacteria's helping heal this process, because let's face it, the symptoms of that are not pleasant. We're not saying that just because we see a different function in this part of the process that it's not, still unpleasant and life-threatening. If we don't help somebody manage those symptoms, then they could potentially, it could be life-threatening. But also at the same time, if we do help somebody manage them, we need to bear in mind that if we affect the function of the TB, we affect the ability to heal also, to come out the other side of this. And what we can do with drugs, we can reduce symptoms so that somebody, although it might take them longer to come out of the process because we're affecting how strong the pendulum is swinging back the other way, let's say, we're affecting the strength of the reaction or the repair, we can in fact make it more manageable, more sufferable, if you like. So I'll talk more about this when we talk about threshold and we talk about, and also at the end when we look at the dynamic health plan, what other things can we look at that create the best optimal environment for me to handle returning to health through various illnesses. And I do see that I have a very dear person, Kazuyo, online, who I would like to interview about her. She has amazing knowledge and study in raw vegan food and in healthy eating, and it's one of the areas I would like to share more of in how we create the best possible healthy chemical environment in the body in order to facilitate the best return to health. So I haven't forgotten that because I'm still thinking about that, how we do that. So I'll come on to threshold a bit more later. So this is what we need to bear in mind. Can you see that in order to be able to do a root cause analysis, it mattered which tissue I was responding, because I needed to know, is it increasing in tissue or is it decreasing? When it's under extra stress or demand, what is its function? What is its purpose of change? And it is this structure that gives me the pointers as to what the response of the tissue is, because of knowing what its function is and how it reacts and how it responds. Okay? So this then makes it possible to see a different response in a different tissue. So I believe that the illness and the cancer that David Bowie had was in the brainstem tissue. So that would be the theme that we would have explored with him had he known this amazing stuff and had he come to somebody and said, help me figure out what I need to work on, help me figure out what changes I need to make to help me come back to health. Okay. And that is my ultimate dream, is that we have this information, everybody has this information, so that they can be more responsive and take more responsibility and have more impact. Okay, but if we look at the ducts, the liver bile ducts, okay, we saw that they were red. We saw that they actually are associated with a different part of the brain, and we know that that tissue responds differently. Okay, we know that that tissue actually, when it's put under demand, it decreases, it ulcerates, it thins, and its function is improved by thinning and actually reducing the amount of tissue. How does that work? I'll explain in a second. Okay, and then of course the second part of this process is to then repair it again. Okay, so there are some parts of the body, the skin being one of them, the outer epidermis of the skin, the central nervous system, and some parts, for example, some veins and arteries, and the bronchi, and the bile ducts, as we're going to talk about now, that they're basically in the decrease, they serve a particular purpose. Okay, now all of those, like the bronchi, the bile ducts, the veins and arteries, they're all tubes. They all pass something along the tube. Okay, so if you imagine that I have a hose with a nice thick wall to it, a nice thick rubber hose. Okay, and I want to pass more water through very, very quickly, the best way for that to happen is to increase the size of the hole on the inside. So what the body is capable of doing very, very rapidly is, on a cellular level, is actually taking away cells, decreasing cells, kind of almost dissolving cells on the surface of the inside of, in this case, the bile ducts, to allow for a quicker passage, dump or download, or whatever you want to call it, of whatever it passes, in this case, bile, through the bile duct. Okay? So it has a completely and utterly different function. It has a completely and utterly different way of reacting in stress. Okay? So its function is to more easily pass bile, to break down a chunk of something. Now, the chunk, because it's the digestive system, it would be normally, let's say, be a chunk of food. But what we find is that information and our situations, our context that we're in, this information and the things that happen to us are like food. And if I can't understand something, I can't break it down, it's too much for me to break down, or I'm holding on to it because I can't figure it out, or I'm angry about it, I tend to hold on, and I tend to, and my body basically reacts as well. My body's trying to help me pass that, digest it, dissolve it, absorb it, or wherever it's actually stuck in my digestive system, it's trying to help me at that point. So this is a different part of the organ and a different tissue response for a very different reason. And as I've explained before, we know that this part of this type of tissue is associated with the more developed part of the brain and with the cerebral cortex. And the theme of this tissue and this part of the brain is social, territorial, and contact. And it's able for us to explore a very specific area based on past research, based on past case studies, as to very specifically what does this tissue and this part of the digestion do. So our question is, in this instance, what traumatic experience would cause the liver and the lining of the bile ducts to widen to allow the bile to flow better? Okay. And what we know from experience is that it is a territorial anger issue. Now, interestingly, through research and case studies, we find that this particular part of the digestive system seems to be engaged or seems to adapt with a particular emotional content. So although it is a territorial anger issue, it would appear that quite commonly in this type of anger, it can be to do with an anger about territory, anger with neighbors, angry with close family, maybe sometimes to do with money and inheritance, that sort of type of conflict. So it is something where somebody has an anger that they cannot process. Okay, let's remind ourselves that if somebody could process their anger or let their anger out or act upon their anger, then they wouldn't have it stuck in the system where the body has to adapt. So it's not been able to be processed in another way. So now the body is trying to help by increasing the flow of the bile to process this anger within this type of context. Okay, so it is anger to do with territory, a breach of your territory, perhaps, for example, like an alpha male taking over your space. So you can't react because it's not really safe to react, but you still have the anger and you still can't process that anger. You can't digest that anger. Okay, so it is a territory anger, quite often with close neighbors, family, something being taken or challenged, or your territory, or something like an inheritance, or your home being under threat and you being angry about it. Okay. So again, we know this through the type of part of the organ and the type of tissue that we know just through general research that it's formed from, and from knowing that it is decreasing in tissue in the first phase to allow the passage of the bile, and that it is repairing in the second phase. Now, again, if somebody were to have an infection in this part of the body, I think it's hepatitis in this part of the body, we would know that this program has been running, but there is now no longer a decrease of cells. It's getting built back up and getting repaired, and it has engaged this particular type of, we'll call it a virus because we won't go into some arguments about whether viruses exist or not. Let's just say that it is a hepatitis virus. Okay. So the thing is, this type of tissue, you'll notice, increases in cells it builds back up in the second phase. So it is a different thing, let's say a different process, and it is less likely to develop a cancer. We can develop a cancer in any tissue if we're stuck in the phase that increases cells. Okay, but it is less likely in this tissue unless somebody goes through the process of resolving the issue and coming out of the stress, but being held in the program by a fear that it may happen again. And what they do is they kind of flick, flat, and flip between triggering themselves and then coming back out of it again, and triggering but coming back out, but spending more time out of it than in stress, if that makes sense. I can explain it with another tissue that works in the same way. So when we get a cold and we get a snotty nose, this works in exactly the same way. This tissue decreases in the stress phase or in the demand phase, and then it repairs when the issue has been resolved. And that's when it gets all clogged up, snotty, and you get all the mucus. So I spoke to somebody on a training who said, well, I get rhinitis. I get ongoing rhinitis. What's that? And I asked about, was there somebody or something, a situation that we found annoyed him, got up his nose. He didn't like the behavior of somebody or something. Is there anything going on along those lines? And he said, oh, well, definitely there is somebody at work who really gets on my nerves. He said, but I realize that it's all to do with my perception, and I know that I can't change them. I need to work on myself. So I know that it's something I've got to deal with, and I need to sort it out myself. So I tell myself it's not their fault, and then I'm usually all right. Now, can you see that the problem with that process is that he's still getting annoyed, even though he can quite quickly come out of that first annoyance and resolve the issue within himself. He still feels the annoyance and therefore triggers the response in the tissue. So therefore he is flip-flacking between the annoyance and repairing the tissue. Okay, and in the nose, basically, if we don't like the smell of somebody's behavior, we tend to, if you think about somebody you don't like or a situation you don't like, we tend to flare our nostrils. It's like looking down our nose and flaring our nostrils is a way of getting in fresher air about the subject. We don't like the smell of this stinks. We even say, don't we, the situation just stinks. Okay, so what we're doing is we're trying to increase the flow of air up the nose, and because we don't like the smell of something. So in this process, of course, we're decreasing the cells in the same way to allow the passage of air, but then we need to repair it, and that's when we feel like we're getting this infection and we're getting this activity. And the repair activity, it's a bit like saying to a builder, well, could you just pop into my house and build me a little stud wall here? It's only just a little stud wall in the middle of this room. I don't, it's not a complicated thing. But of course, he doesn't just come and build the stud wall, does he? He comes in and he brings all his crap with him and he makes a mess. And when he's finished the wall, he takes it all away. Okay, and our body's effectively doing the same thing. It's doing all its repair. It's got to make it's got to bring all the right, well, it's got to swell with water and bring everything it needs to repair the tissue, and then take away what is no longer required. Okay, so this is what happens in this tissue. Okay, so we can see that it makes a big difference understanding what the tissue is, which part of the organ is responding and what the tissue is made of. Okay. So basically what we're saying is that the process itself just happens. If I'm not going to get food, then I'm going to increase my function. Or if I need to digest something very quickly that is sticking for me, and I need to break it down and digest it, then I need a bigger download of the right of bile or whatever. But that being normal, it would come and go through the phases and come out the other side. And the problem that we have as human beings is we don't let things go. Now, either we are in a real threat, so I'm not saying that this is purely and only triggered by just thinking about something. If we're under a real threat, a prolonged threat, somebody in a war zone or a refugee, somebody that is under a real threat of starvation or of danger, then it is possible that this is a continuing trigger. But also it could be triggered by my fear that something is going to happen, or by my belief that something is going to happen. Okay. Now, what we ultimately want to do is we want to exit the program and come out to health and homeostasis. And I've put a note here at the bottom about cognitive dissonance, I think I spelled that right, and threshold factors. And as I mentioned before, Kazuyo is somebody I want to talk with more about health and nutrition, because there are many factors that help and support me through these two phases. So what we're looking at is allopathic medicine tends to focus on the symptom, and it tends to focus on what it can do to minimize symptoms. But that may not necessarily help me through the two phases, or it may prolong my time within the two phases. It could even trigger me back into the first phase and put stress on the system. What in fact it's doing, it's putting stress on the system, and it's actually preventing me going through the process. But like I said, if we take some of the pressure off, that could help me through with less symptoms or less pain or less risk. But I also run the risk of keeping myself trapped within this cycle, let's say. Alternatively, the symptoms themselves can end up re-triggering me. Okay, so imagine that I have a fear of losing my job and I don't know where the money's coming from and where the next meal is going to come from. And then I hear I have a debilitating or life-threatening illness. Now I really have something to worry about, because I am definitely going to lose my job, and how am I ever going to feed my family? So the symptoms in themselves can then begin to keep you locked in. Also, the thing to bear in mind is that a diagnosis of a serious disease can also trigger other programs. So if I have been given a diagnosis of cancer and it hasn't been handled very well, and I have a fear of cancer, then I very possibly may develop other programs. A fear of dying is a very common, what is called a metastasizing cancer. But actually, for us, using this model, it is another traumatic experience. It is another program running, and it is a fear of not. The last thing I can do without after water is air. It's the last thing that we finally give up on. So a fear of death triggers a program in the lungs, same program of increased function, like the increased function in the liver, in the alveoli, to increase my ability to get more oxygen, take more oxygen in. So a badly handled diagnosis, for example, of liver cancer could trigger a traumatic experience in somebody, and a fear of survival and a fear of dying, and then trigger a lung, an increase in cell tissue in the lungs. Okay, which of course is diagnosed as then afterwards as a lung cancer. So you started with liver, they talk about it metastasizing, but actually it's just another program. Okay. So again, that trauma and that program needs to be handled in itself as well. Okay. So so what I want to also just add to this is looking at these two phases here and looking at this concept of demand and recuperation and this pendulum effect of going into one phase and creating tissue or depleting tissue and then having to correct that out the other side. What we can see in this model is that treatments and therapies and techniques that are used to support health, homeopathic remedies, are looking at how the body stays healthy and becomes healthy again. And they look to use the body's own mechanisms and own processes to actually come out the other side. So rather than inhibit symptoms and put potential stress back on the system, that's why sometimes homeopathic remedies appear to cause symptoms. Because if you look at this model and you say, well, I get some symptoms when I come out of the stress. Well, if I put my body into healing, it actually has got to go through some symptoms of regeneration and replenishment and possible infection because I'm engaging with certain microbes. And this is why sometimes things appear to get worse before they get better. They're actually going through a process where the body is going through its own mechanisms. Okay, so just bearing that in mind, just when we look at what we do. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on cognitive dissonance, but I will make a separate just a video about that. So I didn't equip myself with the dictionary definition of cognitive dissonance, but I'm just going to explain it my own way. So we talk about the word conflict, okay? And I just want to explain what I understand by the word conflict. So you may hear the term when you're talking with somebody who understands this model, that we have a conflict shock, and then we have a program running. Now, conflict to me is to do with two things that don't go together. They are in conflict, okay? And conflict can hold these programs in place. So I'm going to use a musculoskeletal model to explain this process, okay? And I'm going to talk about the neck in particular because it is something that I've worked with a number of people on, okay? Now, the program that runs in the musculoskeletal system is very much like going to the gym, and it is like saying that I want to be able to pick a certain amount of weight up, but I know I'm not strong enough to do it yet. So I have to improve my muscle capacity. And the way I do that is I actually have to damage my muscle first by trying to lift something that is too heavy. And I kind of tear the muscle. I did lots of little what they call micro tears in it, and it damages the muscle. That is the demand phase. And then I have to go away and rest it. And the resting is the most important part of this phase because it's where the muscle increases its capacity to lift and to do its job. So when I go back to the gym a few days later, having been going to the gym and it's called DOMS, delayed delayed onset muscle tiredness or muscle pain? Within the next day or so, you get an aching in the muscle, and it's because the water goes there and the swelling's there and all the chemicals and the tissue's being repaired. Okay. Now, that's a normal program. But if I have an ache or a pain in my body that is not healing and is not going, and I've worked with a few people now with neck pain in particular, there must be a reason that it isn't going. So cognitive dissonance can help trap us within a program. And if we come back to survival intelligence, okay, I'm constantly looking, or my body is constantly adapting to survival. I'm constantly able to adapt to survival. But if I have two potential dangers, each equally as dangerous, my body finds it difficult to adapt to one or other of those because they're both as dangerous. They're almost vying for a truth. The two truths that are equally true. What I mean by that is, let's say, and even the most simplest of processes becomes a survival need for me as a more developed, as a human being. So being able to stand up and hold my head up and be the person that I am and say what I want to say and be who I want to be and stand up and be just and fair and that's a survival thing for me. It's about me being me. So it's at the core of who I am, which means it's about surviving as me. So it's become a survival issue for me. So I believe that if I don't hold my head up and speak up for myself, this is really fundamental to me. This is becoming a survival issue. I can't be myself. I can't hold my head up for what is right and what is true. I can't hold my head high and show people what I believe or speak up for myself. Okay. But at the same time, although that's a very powerful program running in me that I feel I need to be stronger to do this, so I have my neck adapting, doing it like it's program at the gym, trying to be stronger to hold my head up. Okay. If that was just my belief on its own, I need to be stronger to hold my head up, I would run the program, my neck would be stronger, and I'd hold my head up. And next time, I would be able to keep my head high and not have to defer my head to something that I don't feel is fair. Okay, because this is the program for the neck, okay, or the main program for the neck. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if I had a particular incident where I couldn't hold my head up, I would activate a program in my neck, but actually I would go through the process and then next time I'd be able to hold my head up. However, cognitive dissonance is when I have two conflicting truths, two conflicting beliefs that I cannot reconcile. So if I also have the belief that it is dangerous for me to hold my head up because, put your head above the parapet, you get it shot off, or, everyone's going to hate me because they'll think I'm mean or that they won't agree with me, so I'll lose people, or it's not safe for me to hold my head up, I now have two conflicting needs, survival needs. I need to hold my head up in the face of injustice. But if I hold my head up in the face of injustice, something bad will happen to me. So now I am flipping between I must hold my head up, I can't hold my head up, I must hold my head up, I can't hold my head up, I must do this, it's not safe for me to do this, but I can't exist, it's a survival thing and I've got to do this, but I can't because it's not safe. So cognitive dissonance is when we have these two truths vying, and now because I don't have the right resources, I don't have the right strategies, I don't have another way to handle this situation. My body is trying to adapt, but then it's not allowed to adapt, or it's trying to adapt one way and it's then trying to adapt the other way. It's trying to go one way and then it's go the other way, and then I get trapped in this process. Okay, so that is what I mean by cognitive dissonance, and we can talk more about that. With some programs are more likely to trap us in those processes. Again, like all sort of conflicts and situations where we develop dis-ease. Okay, dis-ease in the body. It could be a real situation where it's literally not safe, or it could be just a fear that it's not safe based on a past experience. Okay, any questions on that? No one's writing any questions? I hope you're all still there. Okay, so I do have some slides here. Oh, here's a question. Quick. Can rhinitis be caused by an irritation such as animal hair, dust, etc. too? Yes, of course. So usually, so thanks for the question, Leslie. Just coming back to the comment about rhinitis, or in fact any illness, and it kind of also ties into our threshold as well, our ability to naturally process things. Our nose tissue adjusts to a change in temperature. It adjusts to dust going up it, so it tries to get rid of it. It our body adapts to our surroundings. It self-regulates, re-regulates. It gets rid of things that are not supposed to be in certain places. If I cut my hand and I get dirt in it, it will wash that out, or it will take it away. Someone get rid of it. It will look after the natural state I'm supposed to be in. It will re-regulate and self-regulate. So if I keep getting someone's hair up my nose or animal hair up my nose, it will probably react to get it out. The question is, if I develop an allergy to a hair, there may be something else going on. Because the one thing that a lot of people get confused of is to say, well, actually, I'll come back to talking about what the doctors don't tell you. I've been subscribing to what the doctors don't tell you, and I have to say, I have to be careful what I say, because I'd like to work with Lynn McTaggart a little bit, but I'm a bit disappointed in the way they tackle things, because what they're really tackling and what they're really saying is the cause of disease is actually a lot of threshold things. It's to do with diet, environment, chemical environment, exposure to certain things. All of these things can affect our threshold. They can put extra demand on our system. But the question we have to ask is, if I put 100 people into that exact same situation, so if you put 100 people into a room with the same animal hair, just to stick with your example, Leslie, if 100 people keep sneezing, then it could be that there's something about the animal hair. But if some have a reaction and some don't, then we would look at, why does this person? Is it to do with their weak? We talk about immune system. Okay, immune system is just the way the body can regulate what is supposed to be happening and what isn't supposed to be happening, and things that are supposed to be there and not supposed to be there. But the concept that every infection is like a failure on our immune system is incorrect. But what does deplete the function of our natural immune system, i.e. our natural ability to maintain health and to build resilience and to function correctly in the face of re-regulation or the need to regulate, could be too many things putting demand on the system. So we do a very simple demonstration when we're teaching workers in Thailand and Indonesia, and we just get them to stand on one foot and say, imagine this is coming to work when you're still tired because you didn't sleep. And then we give them a cup to hold high up and say, and this is a demanding person who needs a lot of attention. And then we give them a heavy bag to hold and say, and here's a baby you've got to look after. And then somebody pulls on their shirt and says, Mummy, and here's your small children. And then someone else starts to poke them and push them on the other shoulder and say, this is the boss at work who wants, you to increase your turnover at work and do more work. Now, all of those things individually are not particularly stressful, but you start to accrue them and then you have a threshold problem. So yes, Leslie, the body has the ability to respond to things, to get them out of where they're not supposed to be and to re-regulate. But if you're having a problem with animal hair, it could be that your threshold is low and therefore you're not responding and re-regulating and being resilient. But also it could be that you have developed a particular association and your body is responding to something, let's say in an exaggerated way. It believes it to be more dangerous than it is, so it's reacting in a way that is trying to keep you safe when it doesn't necessarily need to. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Somebody just saying thank you, that to go. So as usual, medical point of view, infection in the liver means virus and infection of bile ducts is bacterial. I'll read over your question again in a moment. It's a bit difficult to get my head around now, but at the moment, yes, an infection in the liver, but it's the liver ducts, okay, that we would say would be a virus because it is that particular tissue responds with viruses, but the tissue of the parenchyma, the actual brainstem associated tissue, would respond to, and the earlier developed bacteria and it actually would be fungus or a mycobacteria. So yes, that would be according to that model, the way you've described it, I think would be the opposite way around. If you're saying that the medical model is an infection of the liver means virus and bile ducts is bacteria. No, it's only, I think only the way that I explained it, perhaps not clearly, is that the bile ducts are the liver ducts. So it's still, we're still talking about the liver, but just that particular tissue within the liver. And then the parenchyma of the liver, the actual kind of main tissue of the liver, would be TB. I hope that's a bit more clear. Okay. Can't see any more questions. Okay, thank you, Leslie. Okay, so there is half an hour left. I have got just a basic overview of how this fits with the rest of the program that I run. Basically, just showing you this slide here, that what we've looked at is the root cause analysis part. Before we do that, we would look at putting everything else in place to make it safe to explore that. So if you were doing the program for yourself, or you were doing the program within a 4-day workshop, you would be looking at a whole day of exploring and putting things in place, building a bigger picture first about the things that may affect your threshold, the things that may be predisposing you to certain perceptions, certain reactions, certain symptoms, a lot of self-work before we go into looking further at the way in which the specific organs and organ tissues respond. Okay, and then heart conscious healing, which is what I have here to show you next, but we don't have time to do now. I just put it in case. So I'll be doing some more presentations specifically on heart conscious healing and more support work for those that are using the process. And then the dynamic health plan. And of course, what we have is a program that is actually 7 steps and that I am in the process of putting online at the moment. So, so the 7 steps at the moment, Unit 1 is online and you can have free access to Unit 1. Let's just go straight to that and I'll show you that. Actually, I'm going to show you the dynamic health plan first. So just to cut right to explain what happens when we're examining all of these factors, in order to be able to impact your health, we're looking at all of these areas: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, environmental, and nutritional. And these all interact with each other. I've broken them down, but of course they're all interrelated. And so we use the process of analysis, of root cause analysis, to help us actually to look at then what can we practically do. And if you remember me saying earlier that sometimes people don't have the right strategies in order to make it safe for them to behave or react differently. So one way we can help somebody to begin to impact their symptoms is to help them find new strategies, new ways of coping, new ways that feel safe for them to manage their situation so that they're not triggering their particular symptoms, whilst we at the same time work on any stuck events, any past events, anything that is unresolved that needs to be resolved in order to prevent the body from being triggered and reacting in the way that it reacts. Okay, so so the process that I've developed called heart conscious healing is a safe way in which we can do that. And it basically allows us to look at the parts of us that have stored that information, that are holding that information as the sort of go-to strategy. And without judgment, without recognizing that we might not like the outcome and the results that we're getting, and that could be obviously symptoms or behaviors or patterns, we can maybe look to understand what's going on better so that we can help the part of us that is holding that strategy and kind of encapsulated that information to update it with more resourced, more information, more creative way in which to solve the problem. So so what I will be doing is on the 27th and 28th of February of this month, I will be in Brighton at the Vegan Fest, and the following day, Monday the 29th, and it's been pointed out to me that it is leap year, so it's only the 29th, 1 in 4 years. I will be at the Brighton Hotel and giving a free introduction to conscious health practice, including the process of heart conscious healing. Okay, more details. I'll send more details out to you about that. But in the meantime, if you want to look at more at how this process works, you can join and sign up for free and get the whole step one, whole of unit 1 of the self-help program online for conscious health practice. Okay, so you just go to conscioushealthpractice.com and you can have a look around and look at the information about the course, and you can sign up for free and have complete access to all of the first unit, all of the first self-help and kind of it begins the process of diagnosis. Okay, it begins to help you almost do like an audit and self-assessment and look at what's going on and look at why you're stuck where you're stuck, what may be predisposing you to be stuck where you are, and not only that, you will have access to the videos of me talking you through, the downloads, the actual kind of worksheets to work through, and the poster that I include in the presentation as well. Okay. The idea is that I try to help myself help people better by making more information available online, making more free information, but also creating the structures that I teach live online for people who want to do them for themselves. So what I'll be doing is not only putting that course online, but I'll also be adding to that monthly more presentations, information. Any paid webinars or paid presentations or things that are on sale on the site will be free for people that sign up for the membership. And I'll be doing regular online kind of clinics, really, where you can ask me questions and I'll help you work through the program. So I know that some people on this call are already existing people that have taken the course. So just to let you know that I'll be soon, in the next couple of days, putting out an email about the next follow-up call, the next clinic call, for you to ask any questions and to follow up with the content from the course. So that all of those recordings will be made available to people that come and are members on the site. Okay, so I'm really trying to structure it so that I can give lots of content, give content to people who maybe don't want to sign up for the full course, but certainly give value to those people that want to sign up and become members on the monthly membership and have access to the online training and all that extra support material. Okay, so that's the not so hard sell at the end, but that's what I'm trying to do. I'll also be setting dates for live trainings and the 4-day workshops, which is the same content, it's just structured slightly differently for the 4 days. It's still the 7 steps to conscious health, but it falls nicely into those 4 sections. So we have a little bit of time left if you have any particular questions. Is it Mariko? I hope I answered yours a bit more clearly. I think we are saying the same thing. It's just I didn't explain that both of the tissues I'm talking about are in the liver, because I was talking about bile and the ducts. Okay. If anyone else has a question, please do ask it now. Oh yes, thank you. Good. So basically, each tissue each tissue in the body has its own function, has a very specific function, and it will adapt depending on the demand that is put on that, its requirement, let's say. It's possible, if we can understand the tissue, to look at what has caused the increase in its function. Or we can come in through the understanding that certain viruses, bacteria, or fungus work with certain tissue, and therefore we can come in through that route of information. But basically, we're painting a picture, we're building a picture of what might be happening in someone's life that is causing what is an intelligent program. And really, the whole purpose of me doing this particular recording, and the whole purpose of me wanting to now really get this out there, is I've been talking about threshold, and I've been talking about healing. Okay. And if we understand that we cannot be in a state of stress or demand and a state of repair at the same time, we need to look at what we're doing to our body when we are in fear, when we are talking about hating cancer, when we are talking about being angry with cancer and stuff you cancer and all of this stuff. Okay. Are we in phase 1 or are we in phase 2? Well, we're clearly in phase 1 because we are getting stressed. We are getting upset about the situation. And in that situation, we are not creating the correct or the optimal environment in our body for healing. So as soon as we start to say about our body, I hate this part of my body, or I'm annoyed with this part of my body, or I'm afraid, or I'm this, as soon as we start to enter into stress about what is going on in our body, then we actually are complicating the process of healing. We're preventing healing. And we therefore obviously affect our threshold. We affect our immune system, and we are impacting on our health, but in a negative way. What I would like to see is, instead of people saying, I hate you cancer, or stuff you cancer, and this will get you cancer, and all this stuff, we are not victims of cancer. We have adaptations in our body that maybe don't need to be happening, but they're being triggered by something, and we need to look at what is triggering them. Okay, and we need to do everything else we possibly can in order to assist our body in its process to health. We need to support it through the process. Yes, we may need to manage symptoms through the process, but basically it is time to start to look at the processes of our body and of our behaviors too differently. Because my body and my system is so intelligent that if I'm not, if a physical adaptation isn't enough, I actually go into psychological adaptations too. They help me function. They help shift my perception, and they actually help me behave differently, because everything else so far, all the strategies I've been adopting so far, have not been enough. So that's what I would like to begin to share. That is why I'm going to give some free talks. That is why I'm writing another book that I am aiming to be out. But it'll be at the publishers at the end of April. And that is why I'm putting more information online and offering more resources. I think it's time to start to step out of this fear, step out of being giving away our power to other people and expecting other people to fix things and heal things, and not listening to our own body intelligence, and not listening and taking responsibility for our own body intelligence. So I hope what I've shared with you tonight makes sense. I hope those of you that already knew some of this information didn't feel that I was laboring too much, but I'll try to keep it simple and straightforward. And I hope that it has started to spark your interest in, if we can understand this just by looking at one organ, how that fits in the intelligence of the structure of this system, with the evolution of my brain, and with the cellular structure of my body and how that's all so uniquely and intricately organized, what else is going on? What do my symptoms mean? What are my symptoms, and what are they trying to tell me? What events are they pointing to? What fears are they pointing to? What adaptations is my intelligent body doing in order to help me, because I don't yet have the strategies to manage them in another way, because that's all it comes down to. It comes down to being more resourced and having more strategies and more choice about how we do things so that the body doesn't have to adapt. Okay. If you've got any questions, please feel free to post afterwards. Um, I will be making this available, but what I'll be doing is creating a whole bunch of different content. Some will be available for free and some will be just on the paying site. And some will be what is called on demand for a minimum fee. And as I create a series of videos, you may be able to get them on demand or as part of membership. And as I've mentioned about interviewing people that I find interesting or I feel will contribute to empowering people with the way that we work and the way that I'm trying to share this information with people, I hope to put up, well, I'm going to aim for one interview a month with somebody that I feel, with information that I feel will support and empower members and people who are interested in this. So, if there are no more questions or any hands up, I guess it's time to call it a day. Oh, somebody says, I agree with you. Oh, hang on, there's a long message here from Kazuya. I totally agree with you, Sam. We need to take charge of our own body and health. Great webinar, thank you. I need to review the recording because I need to be away. Okay. Yeah, so I noticed some people have come and gone, and I appreciate it was quite a long webinar as well. So, yes, she's saying that she'd love to talk later. Good. I know there are some amazing people out there, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert in all of the areas that I believe we need to understand better. So that's why I think it's so good to promote people who are really specialists in studying very specific things. So I want to work with people that do understand where I'm coming from and that are happy to work with me and really promote their work. So Kazuyo, you've been doing amazing things, and I would really like to do that. And so yeah, I look forward to talking with you about that. And at some point later, further down the line, I will be offering conscious health practice coach training. But the purpose of it is to give people the foundation and the background about conscious health. So whether you are an EFT or a matrix or you use, or you're a therapist or whatever you do, it is possible for you to be a conscious health coach using the techniques that you have. This is foundational stuff. I think this is stuff that every therapist should know, as well as every individual and every person out there. But at the moment, my focus is on getting this information out to more people, to people who want to have an impact on their health, who want to have an impact on their family's health, who want to take responsibility and understand why they've been stuck, what's been preventing them from moving forward, so that they can become unstuck and move forward. So that's the aim, and then eventually nobody will be able to qualify as a conscious health coach unless they've been working with conscious health practice for themselves, because this really is one of those things you've got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And when I say that, I don't mean that I'm perfect, and I don't mean that I don't still have issues and stuff to deal with. I'm living a conscious healthy life. I'm seeing the intelligence of my body, even if I repeat the program, even if I'm triggered and I have a symptom. I am using that information that the body's giving me to look at where in my life I've developed that strategy, how it's been serving me so far, and how I might evolve that now, and how I might give myself more choice over new strategies so that I can return to health, and not just return to health, but of course become stronger, wiser, more resilient, more able to cope with uh, things that happen in life, and more able to bounce back and be energized and get myself out there and do what I'm here to do. So that's the ultimate aim. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody. And as I say, if you've got any more questions, do feel free to email me. And uh, yeah, I think that's probably a nice thought to leave you on, is how can you be your optimal self and get out there and be the you that is your gift to the world, and do it in a way that you love your life and you feel good about yourself. I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? Is being you, that the you that you want to be, and getting yourself sharing that with other people. So here's to your health and happiness, and I look forward to seeing you register on the site for your free step one, and I'd like to see you stay with us as I add the content. I am in the process of adding the rest of the content, and obviously the rest of the steps to take you through the program. So feel free to contact me if you need to, and I hope to see you again. Thanks very much. Bye bye.